It started quietly, almost too quietly. The morning after Chloe's 17th birthday, I sat at the kitchen island, letting my coffee go cold while the early spring sunlight filtered through the blinds. The house was silent, just the subtle creak of wood as it adjusted to the temperature, and the faint hum of the refrigerator behind me. Marissa and Chloe had said they were spending the day in the city. Some new exhibit, a gallery with abstract light installations. They'd left early the day before, and I hadn't heard from them since a brief check-in text around noon. I didn't mind. I assumed they were having their mother-daughter time, as they should. But as I mindlessly scrolled through my feed, a post from one of Marissa's old friends caught my attention. It wasn't tagged, but her name stood out in the caption. "Great to catch up with everyone again. Lake memories never get old. Yellow heart # Chloe's 17th." I froze. Lake. I tapped the post. The image loaded slowly, then exploded into color on the screen. There was Marissa, standing with one arm hooked around Nick Watson's shoulder. Nick, her ex-boyfriend from years ago. The one she always insisted was a distant memory. He was smiling, holding a glass of wine. Draped loosely around his neck was her scarf. Unmistakably hers. Soft Berg *NDY silk with an embroidered floral pattern I had given her 3 anniversaries ago. Behind them was the unmistakable setting of our lake house deck. The uneven wooden planks, the dark wrought iron chairs, the aged oak table that had weathered more than a few storms. On one of those chairs rested a men's dress shirt, light blue, monogrammed at the collar with N.W. My chest tightened. I stared at the image for a long time, as if still waking up. The image didn't lie. The context was painfully obvious. This wasn't a spontaneous reunion in the city. This wasn't some gallery stroll with Chloe. This was an orchestrated gathering, one I wasn't invited to, one I wasn't even supposed to know about. And it happened at my lake house. The smile on her face was effortless. It wasn't the smile she reserved for polite photos or family portraits. It was casual, comfortable, like she was exactly where she wanted to be. Chloe stood in the background, half visible, her expression unreadable. There were others in the frame too, mostly Marissa's side of the family and a few old friends I vaguely recognized from holidays past. But none of that mattered. It was the shirt. That damn shirt. I zoomed in. The stitching on the collar was too sharp to ignore. Nick Watson. The initials matched. The placement was too deliberate to be accidental. It was the kind of detail most people wouldn't notice. But I noticed. I sat there for nearly 15 minutes, the coffee long forgotten. My heart rhythm steady but my thoughts unraveling in silence. I didn't even realize how still I was until my phone dimmed from inactivity. I tapped it awake and stared again. Screensh *T. Saved. When they returned later that evening, Marissa came in with shopping bags, museum pamphlets sticking out from one, and Chloe walked past me, mumbling something about homework. I watched Marissa as she placed the bags down and started telling me about traffic and a bad parking spot and a particularly moving sculpture. She didn't ask how my day had gone. She didn't even look me in the eye until I pulled out my phone and showed her the post. There was a flicker, not of surprise but of calculation. Her eyes scanned the photo like it was a press release she needed to spin. Then came the explanation. It had been an impromptu thing. Someone decided to swing by the lake house. Nick just happened to show up. They hadn't even planned it. Chloe had asked to invite a few friends for a quick gathering. Nothing major, nothing worth mentioning. She used that same soft tone she reserved for calming clients over the phone. She was quick. Too quick. The answers were layered with practiced pauses and just enough detail to sound plausible, but not enough to satisfy. She insisted she had nothing to hide. She said it wasn't even a real party, just a few familiar faces reconnecting for Chloe's birthday. The shirt? Maybe he left it behind, she said with a light shrug. You know how he is. She smiled. I didn't argue. Not then. Instead, I nodded slowly and said I was glad they had a good time. I watched her walk into the bathroom, heard the door click shut, and listened to the water run. The water always ran longer when she didn't want to talk. I sat back in my chair and opened my gallery. Zoomed in again. That image now held weight. A simple photo, likely posted without a second thought, now anchored the truth I had long refused to examine too closely. Because the signs hadn't just started appearing that day. They'd been stacking up in the background for months. Casual, seemingly innocent details I had trained myself to dismiss. But now, with that photo as context, everything was shifting into focus. The lake house wasn't just a backdrop. It was a symbol. A place we built together, paid off with bonuses and overtime, repaired after a tree fell on the porch, decorated with family photos and Chloe's childhood drawings. And she had used it, without me, to entertain people I never approved of, to reconnect with someone who had no place in our life anymore. She didn't even tell me. I remember every step I took that evening. How I lingered at the back patio door, looking out toward our empty backyard, imagining what had gone on just 24 hours earlier. Laughter under the string lights, wine spilled on the steps, her sitting beside him, close enough to share that scarf. The shirt casually dropped like it belonged there, like he belonged there. That was the moment I realized I had been living in a version of our marriage she had already started rewriting. Maybe it wasn't the first lie. Maybe it wasn't even the worst. But it was the one that changed everything for me. Because it wasn't just about who she invited or who she was with. It was about where I wasn't. She hadn't left me for another man. She had simply started living a life that no longer included me. At least not in the rooms that mattered. Not in the memories she was making now. I didn't sleep that night. I lay beside her, listening to her breathe steadily, like the day hadn't upended anything. I kept my phone in my hand. I scrolled through more photos from the party, comments beneath them, faces tagged, the timestamp confirming the lie. My name wasn't mentioned once. I wasn't even a ghost in the background. The next morning, I stood at the sink, watching her in the reflection of the window as she poured cereal into Chloe's bowl. She moved like someone unbothered, unapologetic. I made a silent promise to myself. I would not accuse, not yet. I would watch. I would wait. But I wouldn't forget. I didn't confront her. Not yet. That would have been too easy for her to dismiss. Too reactive, too expected. Instead, I let the photo become a magnifying glass. Every detail I'd once brushed off now resurfaced, sharper, louder, impossible to ignore. Her business trips. That's where it started. Marissa didn't travel much before. Her job in operations management rarely required it. Most of her work involved internal systems, scheduling, vendor coordination, not exactly jet-set material. Yet in the past 8 months, she'd suddenly been flying out 2 or 3 times a quarter, always to vague locations, a summit, a logistics conference, internal strategy alignment. She never brought back materials from these events, no brochures, no branded notebooks, nothing but a few generic photos and stories that felt prepackaged. I remember one trip to Phoenix when I offered to drop her at the airport, and she insisted on taking a rideshare. Traffic's easier that way, she said. Now I wasn't so sure she'd gone to Phoenix at all. Then there was her phone. Always face down, always silent, and always in her hand, even in moments that once belonged to us. During dinners, while we watched a movie, even during Chloe's school presentations, she'd sneak glances, claiming it was work. Once, while she was in the shower, a message popped up on the locked screen. Said only, "Made it back. Last night was something." There was no name, just an international number. Before I could react, the screen dimmed, and I stood there, heart thudding, wondering if I had imagined it. I hadn't. She changed her password the next day. Her wardrobe evolved too. Marissa always had an eye for fashion, but recently her outfits were noticeably curated. New brands I'd never seen before, subtle but expensive. Delicate jewelry that didn't come from me. Scarves, like the one she left around Nick's neck, that matched no occasion I was ever invited to. The biggest shift was her perfume. It used to be soft and floral, something light she'd worn since our first year of marriage. Now it was heavier, darker, with notes of something I couldn't place. A new identity clinging to her skin. Her social media, once filled with family moments, became sparse. A few polished work photos, a post about Chloe's birthday, none of me. The lake house post was the only reason I knew what had really happened that day. I began to wonder how many other moments I had missed, How many photos I hadn't seen because they were never meant for me. Her presence online had become a filtered stage, curated for a version of her life that didn't include the one we shared. There were more subtle things too. The way she avoided long eye contact. The delayed responses when I spoke. The rehearsed enthusiasm that always ended too abruptly. I'd ask how her day went, and she'd say busy before changing the subject. Sometimes I caught her staring into nothing, a small smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. When I asked what she was thinking, she'd blink, then shrug, and say, "Nothing important." I remembered the highway detour. It was 3 months before Chloe's birthday. We were driving to a dinner with friends when I offered to take the wheel. She hesitated, then declined, insisted she felt like driving. About 20 minutes in, I noticed she missed our exit and took a back road I didn't recognize. I asked if she was lost. "Just wanted a different view," she said. But she drove that route with a strange mix of familiarity and alertness, like she was expecting to run into someone. We arrived late. She blamed construction. At the time, I let it go. Then there was the hotel keycard. I found it tucked in the back pocket of her coat while looking for a dry cleaning receipt. It was from a boutique hotel across town, modern, discreet, not the kind of place you book for business. It didn't even have a conference room. The card had no date, no room number, just the logo. When I asked her about it, she laughed it off. Said she must have grabbed it by mistake when meeting a colleague for drinks in the lounge. I nodded, pretending to believe her, but the card stayed in my drawer for weeks. A silent artifact. These weren't isolated incidents. They were pieces of something larger, a blueprint for a parallel life she was designing carefully, just out of my reach. At first, I blamed myself. I wondered if I had become too predictable, too quiet. Maybe I had pulled back without realizing it. Too much time at work, too many evenings spent cleaning the garage or fixing the faucet or budgeting bills, while she poured wine in a different room. But that guilt didn't last long, because the more I looked, the more I saw. A receipt for 2 entrees at a restaurant I'd never been to, found in the side pocket of her purse. A box of chocolates in the kitchen, still unopened, with a handwritten note I couldn't decipher, shoved beneath the plastic tray. The note simply said, "Till next time." No signature, just that. She once came home wearing a hoodie that didn't belong to either of us. When I asked, she claimed it was Chloe's. But Chloe said it wasn't hers, and it didn't smell like our laundry. It smelled like someone else. A faint trace of cedar and cologne. It disappeared from the house the next day. And maybe the biggest red flag of all, the way she started narrating events that never happened. She'd reference conversations between us that I couldn't remember, mention decisions we'd supposedly made together. Like the time she said we'd agreed not to go to the Andersons' annual barbecue. "We talked about it," she said, "but we hadn't. I wanted to go." She told them we were out of town. I stayed home that night, alone. When I tried to revisit any of these moments, she met me with gaslight clarity. Perfectly chosen phrases to undermine my memory. "You probably just forgot. I told you about that already. You must have been distracted." It was like being erased one small detail at a time. I didn't fight back. I documented instead. I started keeping a journal. Not handwritten, but typed and encrypted, stored in a cloud folder only I could access. I logged every oddity, every inconsistency. The receipts, the date-stamped screensh *TS, the tone of her voice, the smells, the timing of her showers, the return times on her car's GPS, the fact that she started using private browsing more often, the fake smile when she said goodnight. She had always been composed, graceful under pressure. But that composure had evolved into something colder, deliberate. She no longer needed to react to me. She was rehearsing a performance for someone else. I didn't tell anyone, not even Chloe, especially not Chloe. There was a part of me that wanted to pretend it could be salvaged, that maybe I was wrong, that stress had made me paranoid. But then I'd hear her voice from the other room, low and sweet, laughing into a phone she would never let me see. Or I'd find her suitcase zipped tighter than necessary, tags pre-removed, no itinerary shared. Everything became a signal. Every explanation was a veil. Every glance was a calculation. And through it all, I kept asking myself one question, again and again, as I sat alone in the house we once built together. What else have I missed? It happened by accident. I wasn't searching for it that night, not consciously. I had sat down intending to back up some of Chloe's old school projects from the shared laptop we hadn't used in nearly a year. It was a dusty silver thing, tucked beneath a pile of tax papers in the home office. Marissa had upgraded to a newer model and said this one was too slow to be useful. But it still worked. I powered it up. The fan whirred loudly for the first few minutes, complaining like an old dog forced out of sleep. The wallpaper flickered to life. A family photo from 3 summers ago, taken on the edge of a pier. Chloe had braces then. Marissa's smile in that image was wide, real, natural. I had to look away. I opened the folders labeled school, family docs, receipts. I knew Chloe had typed up some essays here, maybe saved photos from her field trips. But what caught my attention was a folder I didn't recognize. Backup_cloud_linked. It wasn't hidden, just forgotten. Or maybe ignored. It had a sync date from 6 months ago. The same month Marissa took that client dinner in Charleston that turned into an overnight stay. I clicked. Inside were dozens of subfolders, some labeled generically, calendar, audio, notes. It looked like a mirror of her phone, a full backup from an older OS. I nearly closed it, telling myself I didn't need to dig. That suspicion was already corrosive enough. But my fingers moved on their own. I opened the audio folder. There were several recordings, most of them short voice memos by the look of them. Grocery lists, a reminder to pick up dry cleaning, a note about a meeting on Thursday. But one file stood out. It was longer, over 4 minutes, titled with a timestamp only, no label, no context. I hesitated for a second. Then I pressed play. Her voice came first, crisp, confident, a tone she rarely used with me anymore, airy, amused, effortless. She was laughing, talking about how exhausting the week had been, about pretending to still care about some deal at work. Her laughter was cut by another voice, a man's, deeper, familiar in an uncomfortable way. Nick. My spine tensed. Marissa lowered her voice in the recording, as if speaking beside someone too close. I have to be back before Nate notices. He thinks I'm still at the conference hotel. Nick laughed. That deep, careless sound I remembered from our early encounters. He asked if she could stay a bit longer. She sighed, teasingly, and then there was a pause, shuffling, a soft sound like fabric against fabric, followed by something unmistakable. A moan, quiet but clear. The rest was indistinct, muffled, but the tone, the closeness, the way her voice dipped and softened. There was no denying what was happening. I stopped the recording. I stared at the screen, but I wasn't really seeing it. My hands trembled. For the first time since the photo, since the scarf, since the lies, I felt something break inside me. Not anger, not yet. Just cold, undeniable clarity. It was her voice. It was his voice. There was no misunderstanding. No way to explain it away. No context that would make it innocent. I played it again. I needed to be sure. This time, I listened without flinching. Every word was now a nail sealing the coffin of our marriage. Her choice of words, his familiarity, the absence of hesitation. This wasn't a mistake. This was a pattern, a continuation, something ongoing. And worst of all, it was casual, like it had happened before, like it would happen again. When the recording ended, I sat in silence. The house around me was still. Chloe was asleep down the hall. Marissa was away again, allegedly in Dallas for a vendor roundtable. The irony was sharp enough to cut through bone. I copied the file to a secure drive. Then I copied the entire backup folder. I encrypted the files, renamed them, and moved them into a digital lockbox under a new email I created that night. I made 3 backups, one physical, one in the cloud, one on a USB. The laptop was closed gently, like a door shutting on something sacred. I didn't sleep. Instead, I spent the night retracing every decision, every doubt I had pushed aside. I remembered the day she claimed to be stuck in traffic but showed up in a different outfit than she'd left in. I remembered the time she went out for drinks with coworkers but came home without her necklace. I remembered birthdays where she seemed distracted, holidays where she barely spoke, anniversaries where the gifts were more obligation than celebration. The puzzle had always been there. But now I held the final piece, and it didn't just complete the picture. It burned the whole canvas. The following morning I woke early. I brewed coffee and stared out the window, watching fog rise over the backyard. The calm before the storm. For a moment, I imagined what it would be like to confront her. To show her the file, to watch her face as she realized what I knew. But I didn't want theatrics. I didn't want shouting, or tears, or apologies crafted for damage control. I wanted precision. So I began with the prenuptial agreement. We had signed it before our wedding, her insistence, not mine. She came from a family that believed in structured wealth, tidy boundaries. The prenup included clauses about infidelity, about asset forfeiture in the event of marital breach. At the time, we laughed as we signed. Just a formality, she said. I now opened the scanned copy, stored in our joint legal archive. The clause was still there, plain, cold, and binding. In the event that either party engages in physical or emotional extramarital conduct, the guilty party agrees to forfeit all claim to shared liquid assets and joint holdings not including primary transportation or individually titled property. I highlighted it. I printed it. Then I pulled the deed to the lake house. It had once been in both our names. But 5 years ago, during a refinance, I had taken on sole responsibility for the new mortgage and, as a result, the title shifted to me. She never asked for it back. She said it made things easier. I called my brother Derek, a real estate attorney. I didn't tell him the whole story. I didn't need to. I told him I wanted to transfer the lake house into a holding trust, one that would eventually belong to Chloe. He agreed to draft the documents quietly, no urgency, no red flags. By noon, I had sent him the first packet of paperwork. By dinner, I had made my final decision. I wasn't going to rage. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of watching me unravel. Instead, I would become something she hadn't expected. Prepared. The proof wasn't just in a photo or a shirt or a scarf. It was in the voice she couldn't deny. In the tone that had once belonged to me, now spent on a man she had promised was just a memory. She had made her choice. Now it was my turn. She didn't know I knew. That was the power I held now, invisibility. There was no advantage in screaming or demanding the truth when I already owned it. Proof gave me the luxury of silence. Silence gave me time. And time, when used correctly, could be devastating. The morning after I heard the recording, I called our estate attorney under the pretense of revisiting our family trust. We'd worked with him in the past, Gregory Lane, a man who loved documents more than people. I didn't tell him about the affair. I didn't need to. All I asked was whether certain clauses in our prenup were still enforceable under the current jurisdiction. He confirmed they were. Infidelity was a breach. I thanked him, asked him to begin drafting asset reassignment documents for a discretionary irrevocable trust, one where I would act as custodian and Chloe would be the sole beneficiary. Greg didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. Next, I shifted our financial landscape slowly and legally. We had a series of joint savings accounts and mid-sized investments spread across 2 institutions. I kept us diversified. Now, that worked in my favor. I didn't drain them. That would have raised red flags. Instead, I moved significant portions into accounts in my name only, citing consolidation for tax planning, when speaking to the bank. I requested printed statements and logged everything with digital timestamps. Each transaction was clean, tracked, and fully documented. The trust for Chloe came together quickly. I named it after the street where she learned to ride her bike. A quiet callback only I would understand. The lake house was reassigned into a holding company managed through my brother's law firm. We finalized that paperwork quietly, no notary needed outside the family. The property title moved like a chess piece across the board, in plain sight, but unnoticed. Meanwhile, Marissa continued on as if nothing had changed. She was still planning a summer refresh for the living room, browsing tile samples and sending me links to custom shelving. She didn't realize that by the time her samples arrived, the house would no longer legally belong to her. She scrolled through throw pillows while I restructured the legal ownership of our lives. I also contacted an IT consultant, an old friend of mine, Lucas, who owed me a favor from our days working on a nonprofit project. I asked him to conduct a passive trace of our home network usage. I wanted to know what devices were connecting and when. Within days, he confirmed several data transfers from Marissa's work laptop to a private Gmail account not registered in her name. One of the recipient addresses matched a name I didn't recognize, but it wasn't hard to guess it belonged to Nick. I logged every IP, every timestamp. I didn't share any of it with her. The day she returned from another conference, I greeted her at the door with dinner waiting. We sat outside. She told me about a keynote speaker who apparently made her cry with laughter. I nodded, refilled her wine. She didn't notice that I'd already changed the house security codes that morning. She still had access for now, but only until I needed to pull the last string. She kissed me that night before bed. The next day, I opened a new Dropbox account and uploaded a carefully curated folder. Inside were 3 items: the audio recording, the digital logs of our financial movements, and a copy of our prenup with the critical clause highlighted. I titled the folder Marital Discrepancy for review. I didn't send it to her. Not yet. Instead, I mailed a physical USB with the same contents to myself via certified mail. A legal timestamp, evidence sealed and registered. I placed the envelope in our safe next to the will, just in case. By the end of that week, Chloe's trust had been funded. The lake house officially belonged to it. The furniture, the land, the title, all protected. If Marissa tried to make a claim on it later, she would be stonewalled by an entity she had no access to and no power over. Chloe didn't know yet, but one day she would. I started distancing myself in subtle ways. I took late walks. I began locking my phone. I created space between us emotionally and logistically. She noticed, eventually. She asked if I was okay. I told her I was tired. Work had been heavy. She believed it, or wanted to. Then came the opportunity. Marissa's company was hosting a charity fundraiser, one of those curated events where mid-tier executives rub shoulders under the banner of philanthropy. It was scheduled for a Thursday evening at a private event space downtown. She told me she would be busy until late. No spouses, she said, claiming it was all business. I didn't argue. Instead, I showed up unannounced, 30 minutes into the event. I wore a dark suit, no tie. I brought a small black gift box tied with a gray ribbon. The doorman let me in without question. Inside, people milled about with flutes of Prosecco, nodding over auction tables and donation pledges. I spotted her quickly, seated at a candlelit table near the back, beside Nick. Their hands were just a bit too close on the white linen tablecloth. Not touching, but hovering, as if trained by instinct to drift apart when anyone passed. I didn't make a scene. I didn't walk over with an accusation. I approached with a smile and simply set the gift box on the table in front of her. She looked up, startled, then confused. I held her gaze for a moment. She said my name, or maybe she didn't. I didn't hear it. I nodded to Nick, then turned and walked out. I didn't look back. Inside that box was a USB drive and a printed page. On one side of the paper, the highlighted section of our prenup. On the other, a photo of the lake house deed, bearing only my name. Beneath both documents, a single line I had typed late the night before. This is not a request. It's a record. I knew it wouldn't take her long to open the file, and I knew what she'd find, but I wasn't done. The following morning, I submitted an anonymous ethics complaint to her company's internal audit division. I provided documentation of unauthorized data transfers to personal accounts, with timestamped logs and **TS. I didn't mention the affair. I didn't need to. Her firm had strict confidentiality clauses. Leaking documents, even innocently, was grounds for investigation. The next day, I received a text from her. One line, "We need to talk." I didn't respond. By then, she was already under review. By the end of the week, she would no longer have access to her company accounts. Everything she had worked to build, the image, the security, the reputation was unraveling, and she didn't yet know how deeply the threads had already been pulled. I didn't do it out of revenge. I did it to protect the truth. And myself. I didn't hear from her the rest of the day. After she texted me that morning, just 5 words, "We need to talk. Please." I muted her number. Not blocked, just silenced. The time for conversation had passed. Every question I might have asked already had answers. Every lie I might have caught had already unraveled. I wasn't going to walk her through my discovery. I wasn't interested in offering her a chance to repaint the facts. Still, I knew she would try, and I was ready. 2 days after the fundraiser, I received a call from an unknown number. I didn't answer. 10 minutes later, a voicemail appeared. Her voice was calm but strained. She said she'd opened the box, understood the message, and wanted to clear the air. She framed her words like a corporate memo, practiced and strategic. She wasn't sorry, not in that message. She was reacting, scrambling, pivoting, as she used to call it in her project briefs. The tone of someone trying to retake control of a room she no longer belonged in. That same afternoon, her company's legal department sent out an internal memo, notifying all personnel of a pending investigation involving data misuse. I knew because Lucas forwarded it to me. He worked in infrastructure for a subsidiary division. Marissa's name wasn't in the memo, but it didn't need to be. By the time it was issued, she had already been locked out of her email and stripped of system access. Her keycard failed the moment she returned from lunch. I pictured her standing in the lobby, tapping it against the scanner, waiting for the green light that never came. That night, she came home earlier than usual. I heard her heels across the entryway, then the click of the door closing with more care than usual. She didn't call my name. She didn't ask where I was. Instead, she went to the kitchen, opened a bottle of wine, and sat alone in the dim light. I watched her from the upstairs landing, out of sight. Her posture was perfectly still. For the first time in years, she didn't pick up her phone. I let her sit there. The next morning, I handed Chloe her school lunch and walked her out to the driveway. I kissed her forehead and told her I might be late getting back. When she asked why, I said I had some legal paperwork to drop off downtown. She didn't ask anything else. She'd started sensing the shifts, even if she didn't yet understand their shape. When I returned home later that day, the house was quiet. Marissa had gone out. She left a note on the counter. Her handwriting still neat, but the message clipped and vague. "Can we talk tonight?" I left the note where I found it. I went upstairs, opened the safe, and reviewed the final folder I'd compiled. Employment records, asset declarations, IP logs, time-stamped audio. I wasn't hoarding them. I was making sure nothing slipped away during the collapse. Because collapse now was inevitable. The following morning, it became public. A regional business journal published a short article, "Senior Operations Director on Leave Amid Internal Audit." No names, but the breadcrumb trail was obvious to anyone in the loop. Nick's firm was mentioned too. His name listed casually as a consultant recently involved in several overlapping contracts. I hadn't sent anything about him. I didn't need to. Once the auditors traced her communication history, they'd find him. I hadn't gone nuclear. I had simply told the truth, quietly with documentation. That weekend, we were supposed to attend a charity brunch hosted by one of Marissa's colleagues. She told me we were no longer going. "Too much going on," she'd said flatly. Her phone was no longer in her hand every second. She barely looked at it. I could see her recalibrating, trying to anticipate what else I might know. She didn't realize I already knew everything. Sunday morning, I took Chloe to the lake house. I hadn't brought her there since the photo surfaced. I didn't want her associated with the mess it had become. But now, with the trust fully transferred and the paperwork sealed, I wanted her to see it again, to reclaim it. We walked the shoreline barefoot. She asked if something was wrong with Mom. I told her things were changing, but we were safe. That was all she needed to hear. She nodded, accepted it in that unshaken way only 17-year-olds could, and walked ahead to take pictures of the water. I stayed back on the deck, my hands resting on the railing where the monogrammed shirt had once been draped. Later that night, Marissa tried again. She cornered me in the kitchen. Her voice was low, but no longer confident. She spoke with restraint, like she didn't know which version of herself to use, the victim, the partner, or the strategist. She asked me if we could fix this. She said we owed it to Chloe. She asked if we could rebuild. I listened, not to her words, but to her timing. She didn't apologize. Not once. She didn't deny the affair, which told me she knew I had undeniable proof. She didn't ask what I had on her, which told me she feared the answer. She only asked if it was too late. I told her the documents had already been filed. Her lips parted, then closed again. I watched the realization move across her face like a tide pulling out. She wasn't surprised, just unprepared. The divorce papers had been submitted that morning under a state statute that allowed for breach of marital contract as cause. The evidence package was sealed with the petition. The recording, the financial movements, the dated photo. The clause in our prenuptial agreement guaranteed her forfeiture of marital assets if infidelity was proven, and the proof was watertight. The house was mine. The savings were no longer accessible to her. The lake property was out of reach, buried beneath legal structure. The only thing she would keep was her car, titled in her name and paid off 2 years prior. I had left it untouched. Later that week, her legal team reached out. They were not ready. I expected bluster, pushback, maybe even threats. Instead, they fumbled. Their reply was vague and padded with procedural delay. But the documents were too clean, the evidence too direct. I had anticipated every argument before they even opened their mouths. They offered mediation. I declined. At the office, I took a day off. I didn't need the distraction. This wasn't about winning. It was about closing the door with precision. That Friday, Marissa didn't come home. She didn't call, didn't text. I found her closet half empty. She'd taken her cosmetics, a few shoes, a coat. The note on the bed was short. "I'll stay at my sister's for now." No signature. No regret. Just that. I packed the remaining items into 3 boxes and had them delivered to her sister's address via courier. Inside the first box, I placed her tablet and charger. Inside the second, her remaining jewelry and a folder with divorce filing confirmation. In the third box, I included the scarf